So here we are again. As some of you may be aware, it's actually been a little while since I've had a chance to make a video and put it up online. And obviously, as you can see, there's been some changes around here, around the studio and everything. I've had a little work done. But more importantly, I'm in a better position to and have more time in order to actually sit down and make these silly little videos and dispense some advice to anybody out there who might be listening. So today I wanted to talk very, very briefly about rules, the rules in game in general, and actually, more importantly, as part of my series of how to be a better GM, is breaking the rules, and more importantly, knowing when to break the rules. Now, this is something that I hope a lot of GMs are in fact doing in the right context out there. One thing that my players have come to expect over the years that they've been gaming with me is that the story is what's most important, and that, of course, as our good friend Nathan Rice once said, story trumps rules. This is something that's always been true for me, and something that I've always taken to heart. And some areas where breaking the rules is important or a good thing, or at the very least for the GM, is, of course, one, to be able to tell a good story. Sometimes you come up with things that don't exactly fit within the confines of the game rules, the rule set, regardless of what game you're playing or what game you're running. Sometimes the GM does come up with something that's a bit more fantastical, something a bit more outside the realm of a possibility as far as the rules go. And the GM needs to feel free and should be free to push those boundaries, especially in three specific cases. One, when the GM needs to be able to maintain control of the game. Two, when an important plot twist or plot device or something of that nature needs to be introduced into the story, in order to keep things moving, in order to keep things going. And oftentimes, this is also something that is put in order to better challenge the players, to make it a bit more challenging for the players and the characters especially, so that when the characters are able to overcome, impossible odds, and when the characters are able to do things that other people aren't, that other people can't, even other characters. When the characters can do things, can overcome impossible odds like that. So then, of course, in and of itself, it makes for better story. And three, as oftentimes, and this is where I find it's most important, as a reward to the characters, to the players, for exceptionally hard work and good ideas, participation in the campaign, especially long-term campaigns, things like that. So the first part, like I said, is knowing when to break the rules in order to maintain control of the game, in order to maintain control of the story. And this can actually be summed up and done very, very simply. Sometimes things happen in the game, and the characters make out a little better than maybe they should have, especially in games like D&D, where you have random treasure generation and stuff like that. Sometimes the characters can get a hold of artifacts and magic items, equipment that is a little too overpowering for their level, a little too overpowering for the game that you're running or trying to run, or in a couple of rare instances, and usually I enjoy this when it happens, is when a player is able to use a particular piece of equipment to their advantage in a way that you hadn't anticipated, or the way the GM that hadn't anticipated, and then things can either get a little out of hand or just get absolutely friggin' crazy. The GM needs to be able to rein things in, not so much to. And this is important also. The GM needs to be able to rein things in, not to exert control over the players, over the characters, over the story, but so that things don't get derailed, like completely derailed, and so that the characters don't get too powerful too quickly, and so that things don't get absolutely crazy and completely out of hand. Obviously, you don't want to be handing out anything equal to artifact level equipment and magic items to low level characters. In a lot of the second edition games that I run, occasionally characters will wind up with magic items that will grant, with magic items that will grant wishes. This can be a problem oftentimes, and at the same time, the GM needs to be able to maintain control over the game in situations like that. So the GM usually might have to do something like describe a situation to the characters, to the players, and tell them how it goes, completely dictate how it goes and what happens in order to regain control over the game and over the campaign itself. And oftentimes, I know this, and I know this actually frustrates a lot of players and upsets, and more often than not upsets them. But when the GM has to dictate how the game goes and what happens, like characters getting captured and all their equipment being taken away, or their ship getting blasted out of the sky and they wind up crash landing somewhere where they'll be stranded. And, they'll be stranded for a while, and no amount of magic or super powerful equipment that they have on hand is going to help them through that situation. In situations like that, it can get frustrating. It can be very frustrating. But again, that's something that the GM may have to do from time to time. I don't recommend doing it more than once or twice throughout the course of an entire campaign. But it is something that the GM may have to do as a GM. Something you may have to do in order to regain, if not maintain, control over the game itself. The second instance where the GM may need to break the rules is, like I said, in introducing different character, plot, and story devices into the game itself. This can oftentimes take the form of incredibly powerful bad guys, or bad guys, villains who at the very least seem incredibly powerful and are capable of doing things that are well outside the rule set, or that are capable of doing things that go way beyond the power level set forth in the books or anything like that, or level of power, rather I should say, levels of power that could normally be achieved by player characters. And this is something that works very, very well for a lot of GMs, and this is something that I myself have done, and I've seen dozens of GMs over the years do this. They introduce a main bad guy who has a ridiculous level of power, something that player characters could never hope to achieve by following the rules in the book. And usually you have the scene where he's introduced, and where the bad guy is introduced, and there's a display of power, and then the characters either fight him and lose, or they decide to run. Now, granted, there is no wrong answer here. You either, because once the bad guy is obviously clearly identified as the bad guy, then you go after him full tilt boogie and try to take him on. But then also sometimes discretion is the better part of valor, and sometimes you have to hightail it the hell out of there. It's happened to me, it's happened to hundreds of players over the years. There's certainly no shame in that. But what's important to keep in mind, what's important to focus on, is that character and the way he's portrayed and the power he has, again, probably well outside the rules, is there to demonstrate not only that he's the bad guy and that he is capable of doing these horrible, horrible, evil things, and he must be stopped. And oftentimes, as with all good storytelling, the characters may need to have that moment of fear, that moment of doubt, where they're where they're telling themselves or talking amongst themselves, saying, I don't know if we can do this. I don't know if we can take this guy on. But then ultimately, as far as the story is concerned, if they don't do anything, then the world is in peril. The world is going to be destroyed. All that kind of stuff. But then when it comes down to the final fight between this overpowered villain that you've created and the main characters, you want to make sure that at the very least they have a chance. I'll say that again. At the very least they have a chance of winning. And then again, as a story or a plot device, the fact that the player characters were able to take on the bad guy and utterly destroy him, face him in his lair after fighting through legions of his minions, stuff like that, it just makes for a more epic, more heroic story. And of course, as for some games that actually have a system where you keep track of heroic deeds, reputation, honor, as it were, in a couple game systems like L5R and old First Edition, Dungeons & Dragons, Oriental Adventures, things like that. And of course, just the straight up reputation system from 7th Sea, my favorite game. These things, these things are important. So it's important for the characters to be able to rack up these kinds of rewards and to be able to add them, to their character. And if the players are clever enough, what they should also be doing, instead of just simply trying to keep track of it all in their heads, would be writing down the litany of heroic deeds that their characters have done over the course of the game. Touching on a few game systems real quick, that's actually of great benefit to anybody playing Earth Dawn. Anybody who may or may not be familiar with Earth Dawn, one of the things that the Great Library of Thrall does is they pay gads upon gads of money for adventure journals. Basically, any character, or rather adepts, who go out and adventure and keep a record of the things they've done, the Library of Thrall will pay a great deal of money for that. So it's basically like they're building their. Not only are they writing the tale of their own adventure, but they get paid for it. They get They get rewarded for it in the end, and on top of that, it's worth additional legend points, which in Earth Dawn is like experience points, and you spend them in order to improve your character. And finally, my absolute favorite, the one I usually certainly use the most in order to run my games, and actually in order to help the characters advance and whatnot, is I will oftentimes break the rules in regards to what the character should receive as a reward. And I do this in many, many different ways. For example, I had a player in my group. Her name was Renee. She and I have been friends for a long time. And she used to play in my Palladium Fantasy group whenever I ran Palladium Fantasy when I lived in Texas. And she had a character who in Palladium Fantasy was a psi healer. And that was her whole thing. She healed, and she was psychic, and so eventually she was able to branch out into other areas of psychic power and stuff like that. As she leveled up, she got better and better. The thing about the psi healer, however, is that they never gain access to what the Palladium system refers to as super psionics, and those are things like some of the things that people may be more familiar with, or rather the really, really high-powered psionic abilities that some people may hear about, like Psi Sword, Psi Shield, stuff like that. And for anybody who may not be familiar with the system, think Psylocke from the X-Men. Psi Sword. There you go. That's all I really need to worry about. So eventually, she got to the point. It got to the point where, as a major reward for achieving long-term goals that the player and the character actually set, she actually became an even more powerful psychic than most other characters could certainly ever hope to achieve. And she eventually gained access to super psionics, and so she was able to do things like, see into the future with damn near perfect clarity, and of course have access to abilities such as Psi Sword and Psi Shield, things like that. The psionics that everybody really, really wants to get their hands on when you're playing any game in the Palladium system, really. And of course, another good example of this, what I'll do as a reward, it helps when I'm running Star Wars Saga Edition RPG. And what I'll do there is I'll go ahead and I'll set up an adventure. And with Star Wars Saga Edition, everything is either a short, medium, or long adventure. And at the end of it, of course, like a lot of game systems, at the end of an adventure is when you receive the rewards, such as that's when you actually receive experience points, as well as other things. What I will do for my characters is, for achieving certain goals throughout the course of that adventure, is I will give them additional talents, additional feats, things like that. And sometimes, instead of keeping track of experience points, because this actually makes it a little easier for me, I'll usually, depending on the length of the adventure, usually only for medium or long adventures, I will go ahead and bump them up a level. But if they managed to complete a specific in-game or a specific mission goal, such as saving the lives of hundreds of people, stopping Superstar Destroyer from destroying the Republic fleet, whatever the hell, it really doesn't matter. I'll go ahead and give them an additional level and things like that. And then the next adventure I would run would be scaled for somebody of let's say scaled for characters of 9th level. But if they gain 2 levels in the previous adventure, if they're lucky enough to gain 2 levels in the previous adventure, then they get to go through a 10th level adventure as 11th level characters. So, stuff like that. Those are just some examples. Of course, I'd love to take the time to talk up 7th Sea and all the things that I do with 7th Sea, but unfortunately, I just really, really don't have the time. So there it is. There's some examples. I may actually do another video specifically on this subject in order to extrapolate on a few more points. I'm not sure, no promises at this point, but mostly I just wanted to get another How to Be a Better GM video out there for people to see. So thanks again, thanks for watching, thanks for listening. I'm Gabriel Stryffe coming at you from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Equitas Veritas Bellatus.